Whenever you call something I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, it's going to be controversial. So it's absolutely critical that you listen closely. Because I don't want you walking out of here thinking I said something I did not say. If you don't listen closely, the results can be disastrous.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Überlebensradar.
Thanks.
Mayday, mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
So Kensington Temple, what are you thinking about? I don't know, Frank. You haven't said much yet. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. I just had 2 hours with the great Pastor Colin, who's a wonderful guy, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. You already know that, don't you? Is that all he gets? Come on! There's people in here going, yeah, you know, he's all right. And we were just talking about apologetics beforehand. Apologetics is not apologizing, as you know. It's giving evidence for what you believe. And actually, recently, I got an email from a United States Marine. So I knew this man was no sissy. I was actually in the Navy for 8 years, which, by the way, stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself. Anyway, this guy was in the Marine Corps, but he wasn't writing me as a tough guy. He was actually writing me as a distraught father. He said, my daughter was the top Christian student in her high school class. She helped lead the youth group at church. She won several scholarships from Christian organizations that she could take to any college she wanted to. So she wanted to go to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to win the Campus for Christ. I live in North Carolina now, about 3 hours from where I live. It's a very liberal school, and it needs to be one for Christ. Anyway, this Marine father said, I sent my daughter off there, and 4 weeks into her first semester, I got a phone call from her. Her words devastated me. She said, Dad, I don't believe in God anymore. Don't believe in God anymore? What? He said, I got in my car, I drove 4 hours down to Chapel Hill that weekend, I sat down with her, and I got nowhere with her. What do you mean you don't believe in God anymore? What happened? And she said, well, we have an atheist who teaches the New Testament class there at Chapel Hill. Yeah, the atheists teach all the religion classes there. And he said, we don't even know who wrote the Gospels, and the Bible has errors in it. So, Dad, I'm an atheist now. Now, ladies and gentlemen, do you think this young woman, by the way, that's not really her, but you get the idea. Do you think this young woman investigated all the evidence for and against Christianity and made a rational decision it was false? You think she did that in 4 weeks? No, you couldn't do that in 4 weeks. What happened instead? What happened instead is she went off to the college unarmed. What's the easiest way to get picked off in a war? It's to not know you're in one. And we've been in a war for the hearts and minds of our young people and our older people as well. The world is not neutral out there. The world will drag you away from the truth. In fact, I contacted this father recently, and I said, how's your daughter now? And she's grown, married, but she's an agnostic now. And he said, is there anything I can do about this? I said, have you ever gotten her any apologetics training? He said, you know, I wanted to, I just never got around to it. It's actually not all that hard to show that Christianity is true, as we're going to see here in just a minute. But too often, the task is never undertaken. In fact, what happens when they go to college is they run into people with a philosophy like Francis Crick, who looks a little creepy to me. But as you know, Francis Crick helped co-discover the DNA molecule. And he wrote a book called The Astonishing Hypothesis. What's the astonishing hypothesis? Here's what he said. The astonishing hypothesis is that you, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. In other words, you are nothing but a molecular machine. You may think you have free will, but you really don't. You may think you're conscious, but that's just an illusion. Because you are completely governed by the laws of physics. Every thought you have is the result of a previous natural cause over which you have no control. This is a very clear statement of what is known as atheistic materialism, and atheistic materialism dominates the academy today. Now, if Crick is right, obviously, Christianity's false, and there is no meaning to life. But I don't think it's all that difficult to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions in the affirmative to show that it's true. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, if you take an honest look at the evidence, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yes. It's actually from our TV show, which is on Wednesday nights in the U.S. Do we have DirecTV in the U.K.? You do? How many have DirecTV? All right, it's not in the U.K. All right, do you guys have Roku? Anyone have Roku? One person has Roku. NRB TV on Roku. You can watch this program. Now, there's this new thing out. I don't know if it's in the UK yet, but have you heard of the internet? Okay, good. It's on the internet. There's the website right there, crossexamine.org up there in the left-hand corner. At those times here, it would only be like 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. your time on Thursday morning. You're up, right? And the show's called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and we are on radio, not here in the UK, but our radio program is podcasted, and you can listen to it anytime you want on the internet, on iTunes, on our app, which I'll tell you about tomorrow. And what we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. And these 4 questions are going to serve as our outline for our entire time together. Tonight, we're just going to cover the first question, and tomorrow we'll get into the next 3. And then later we'll get into your questions. But why are these the 4? Does truth exist? Well, obviously, if the prevailing worldview is true, that there is no truth, or all truth is relative, or it's true for you but not for me, then quite obviously, the Bible can't be true. Of course, if there is no truth, then any book written by an atheist can't be true either. Right? We're going to deal with that question first. Second question, does God exist? Obviously, the Bible can't be true if there's no God. You can't have a word from God if there's no God, right? But I hope to show you tomorrow that there really is a theistic God. What do I mean by a theistic God? That's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things, and whose every attribute is infinite. We're going to look at 3 arguments tomorrow for this being. Then we can get to question number 3, are miracles possible? Obviously, miracles are not possible if God doesn't exist. Now, a lot of people don't believe in miracles, but I hope to show you tomorrow that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and we have scientific evidence for it. Then we can get to the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we can see if the events of the New Testament really did occur. Particularly, the central event, the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. Did Jesus really die and rise from the dead? Because, ladies and gentlemen, if Jesus really rose from the dead, game over. Christianity's true. That's the central fact in Christianity, other than God exists. Now, can we really believe that? We're going to look at the evidence for that tomorrow. Now, some of you look at that, wait a minute, Frank, do you believe the Old Testament's true? Yes. How? Well, look, if the New Testament's reliable, you get the Old Testament thrown in, right? Now, who's in the New Testament that can authenticate the Old Testament? Jesus, right? If you're ever in Sunday school, you don't know the answer, just say Jesus, you'll probably be right. That's right. If Jesus really is God, as the New Testament documents claim he is, now that's a big if, but if he really is God, whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught the entire Old Testament as the Word of God, so if the New Testament's reliable, you get the Old Testament thrown in. You with me on that? Now, the book goes into a lot more detail than these 4 questions. In fact, in the book, there's 12 points that show Christianity's true, but these are the essential 4. If you can remember truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament, you can show that what C.S. Lewis, your own C.S. Lewis, would call mere Christianity is true. Okay? Now, if you want to go deeper, you can. Because there's a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. There's a DVD set that you can actually download online. And there's a new book called Stealing from God. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for you Christians in here, stealing from God is not about tithing. Okay? Is this book about tithing? No, no, no. Not that there's anything wrong with tithing. But no, the subtitle of the book is Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. I've noticed that whenever atheists are arguing there is no God, they're stealing aspects of reality from God to say he doesn't exist. And we may talk about that a little bit tomorrow as well. Now, by the way, all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay? Just so you know, I've got 3 sons, so I need some help. Actually, they're older now. They're grown. In fact, the oldest 2 are in the United States Air Force. They were much smarter than me. Instead of going into the Navy, they went into the Air Force. The oldest one is an intelligence officer in the Air Force. He's reading your email right now, by the way. And by the way, you shouldn't be emailing in church, okay? So knock it off. The second son is a KC-10 pilot. A KC-10 is a big plane that flies around and refuels other planes. So he'll be flying along and another plane will come up to him and get gas, okay? So what we say about Spencer, our middle son, is that every day he flies up to 30,000 feet, he sits around and he passes gas. And he gets paid for it. Every man's dream. If I got paid to pass gas, I'd be a multimillionaire already. The third son is not in the military, but he is out of the house. So my wife and I, for about the past 2.5 years, have been empty nesters. Yeah, it took us a while to get used to that. About 10 minutes. That's how long it took to change the locks. Do we have any empty nesters in here? Empty nesters? Just a couple. Usually in America, we've got a lot more empty nesters. Our house is clean because they're out of the house. Gee, when they're home, you got to clean the house every 2 hours. When they're gone, about every 2 weeks. Now, this presentation I'm about to show you, I want to send to you in a PDF if you want it. What you need to do is go to this website, crossexamine.org/FF. That stands for Fearless Faith. And if you send me an email, I'm going to send you this PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format. And I'm also going to send you the first chapter of this Stealing from God book. And I'm going to send you a couple of presentations from my friend J. Warner Wallace, the cold case homicide detective who's written some great books on Christianity. So if you want that, type that into your browser and send us an email. We'll send it back to you. We're not going to give your email address to anyone else, but you've got to type that in. You're the only people that know about this. There's nobody, there's not a link on our website. You've got to type that into your browser, okay? Everyone got it? All right, now, we're going to start here at point 1, does truth exist? Now, wait, before we get into this, we will have time for Q&A. Actually, Pastor Colin said we ought to do Q&A, and I said, Colin, I'd rather do just Q, no A. Okay, so that way everyone gets to ask a question, and it takes all the pressure off me. All right? No, toward the end of this, we'll do Q&A tonight, and we'll do Q&A throughout tomorrow if you can come back. All right? You guys ready to go? Yes. Start here. Does truth exist? Now, where I come from, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Do you guys have movies in the UK? Okay, good, just checking. Because Tom Cruise had Jack Nicholson on the witness stand, and he said to him, "Colonel, I want the truth." And Nicholson said, Kensington Temple. That was weak. If he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. "You can't handle the truth, Colonel." "Colonel, I want the truth." Much better, much better. Well, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, "You got your truth, I got my truth, there is no truth, all truth is relative." You've heard these claims, right? Well, in order to talk about this, we've got to talk about a law of logic. And the law of logic is known as the law of non-contradiction. And the law of non-contradiction helps us discover what is false. For example, it says that opposite ideas cannot be both true and false at the same time. Or the opposite ideas cannot be both true at the same time and in the same sense. For example, the earth is either round or it's not round, but it's not both. Right? It's either round or it's not round, it's not both. This basic law of logic just written into the furniture of the universe. I would argue the laws of logic are consistent with God's nature. They're immaterial laws, that's just the way the reality is, okay? Now, some will say, "Okay, Frank, that's good, law of non-contradiction. What does this have to do with religion?" Because you see, religion is just all about faith. It's not about fact, it's about faith. That's not true. In fact, let's take the most basic religious claim. Does God exist? And we'll take a couple of British gentlemen who debated recently on this. Oxford professor John Lennox and Oxford professor Richard Dawkins. As you know, John Lennox is a Christian who teaches at Oxford, who is a brilliant mathematician and philosopher. And Richard Dawkins is a brilliant zoologist who has written the book, The God Delusion. He thinks if you believe in God, you're deluded. And these men actually debated. Now, here's my question. Can both of these men be right about this particular topic? No, right? I mean, they both can't be right. If Dawkins is right, Lennox is wrong. If Lennox is right, Dawkins is wrong. But they're both not right and they're both not wrong. Right? Everyone with me so far? So, who's right? You guys are having trouble? It's Lennox, all right? I'm going to give you some evidence it's Lennox, but the only point I want to point out here is religious claims are claims about reality too. Now, I don't know if you've seen this debate. Actually, they've had a couple of them. They had one here in London, I think in a museum. Does anyone know where that was? Natural History Museum, yes. That was probably 7, 8 years ago. They had one in Birmingham, Alabama. And I don't know if you know John Lennox, but he is the most jovial, friendly, likable guy you'll ever meet. I mean, if everybody was like John Lennox, the whole world would be Christianized today, because he's not only brilliant, but he wears Christ very well. He's the kind of guy that is always smiling, and he has all these funny little quips that your favorite uncle has. You know, you just love a guy like that. Now, Richard Dawkins is also brilliant, but he can sometimes come across as a sourpuss. In fact, one guy watching the debate, he wrote a review on it, and he said, watching John Lennox debate Richard Dawkins was like watching Santa Claus debate the devil. You got to watch the debate because it is quite a good debate, and Lennox, I thought, did very well. Now, the law of non-contradiction is undeniable. Even those who deny it use it. Suppose you go to a friend of yours and he makes a statement that's contradictory, and you say, "Hey, that violates the law of non-contradiction. It can't be true." And your friend just doesn't want to hear it. In fact, he says, "You know what? I don't even believe in the law of non-contradiction." What would you say to him? This is the interactive portion of the program. He just contradicted himself. The great Dr. Sam Solomon's here, ladies and gentlemen. He is on it right away. That's exactly right. If somebody says, "I don't believe in the law of non-contradiction," what I would say to them is, "Yes, you do." And they'll say, "No, I don't." You say, "Yes, you do." "No, I don't." "Yes, you do. You're using it right now to contradict me." You see, you can't think a thought without the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction is to thinking what your eyes are to seeing. You can't see without eyes, and you can't think without the law of non-contradiction. As I said earlier, it's just part of the furniture of reality. In fact, there was a great Muslim philosopher many years ago, Avicenna, who had a great way of convincing people who denied the law of non-contradiction that they were wrong. Here's what Avicenna said. He said, anyone who denies the law of non-contradiction should be beaten and burned until he admits that to be beaten is not the same as not to be beaten, and to be burned is not the same as not to be burned. Right? Being beaten is not the same as not being beaten, and being burned is not the same as not being burned. You get the idea. Now, hold on to the law of non-contradiction. We're going to come back to it. I want to point out that all truth is absolute truth, or we might say objective truth. Something that is true for all persons at all times in all places. There are no relative truths. You say, wait a minute, Frank, I can think of a relative truth. Like what? Well, right now it's pretty warm here in London. I come to London and I think I'm in North Carolina. It's been warm the past couple of days. In fact, you might say, look, man, I feel warm right now. But the people in Antarctica, the 8 people that are there, they feel cold. That's relative. No, it's not relative at all. Why? It's absolutely true for all people at all times in all places that when referring to you right now, you feel warm, if in fact you really do. Because truth is what corresponds to its referent, or truth is what corresponds to reality. And it's absolutely true for all people at all times in all places that when referring to the people in Antarctica right now, they feel cold, if in fact they really do. Truth is truth. Now, if you try and say this in our society today, that all truth is absolute, people will claim that you are very judgmental. In fact, they will say things like this to you. They'll say, you know what, there is no truth. Or they might say, you can't know truth. Or they might say, all truth is relative. Or my favorite, it's true for you, but not for me. You've probably heard people say this. Well, Christianity's true for you, Buddhism's true for me. Or they might say, no one has the truth. You know, that's one thing I hate about you Christians. You're arrogant. You think you have the truth. Nobody has the truth. Or if they really get annoyed with you, they might say, you know what? You just ought not judge. Jesus said, don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrites? Stop judging. Now, if you can't answer these claims, if you're a Christian, you can't say the Bible is true. And if you can't answer these claims and you're an atheist, you can't say Richard Dawkins' book is true. Right? So there's got to be a problem with these claims. What's the problem? Can anyone see the problem? What's the problem? What do all these claims violate? They all violate the law of non-contradiction. That's why we went through that. In fact, here's your greatest tool. In fact, I think for me, this is the most important thinking skill I ever learned. But this thinking skill, even if you're an atheist here tonight, thank you for coming. If you're an atheist here tonight, this will be worth your time even if you stay an atheist. Because if you learn this thinking skill, it's going to prevent you from going down the intellectual cul-de-sacs that our culture wants to take you down. These intellectual cul-de-sacs that ultimately will cause you a lot of pain and suffering if you keep going down them. And here's what you need to do. This is your greatest tool in answering these objections. You want to apply the claim to itself. Apply the claim to itself, or we might say turn the claim on itself. Let me give you an example. If I were to say I can't speak a word in English, what would you say to me? You just use English to say it, right? It's what's called a self-defeating statement. If I say I can't speak a word in English, I'm using English. This is self-defeating. Or if I were to say, my brother is an only child. Or my parents had no kids that lived. Or if I were to say, all generalizations are false. Some of you will get that tomorrow. Or if I were to say, everything I say is a lie. Some of you will never get that one. All right? These are self-defeating statements. And if you can get good at identifying self-defeating statements, you're going to be a fearless, what we call apologist for the Christian faith. Because you're going to see how many philosophies and statements that are out there in the culture that are supposed to refute what you believe actually are self-defeating. They can't be true. They violate the law of non-contradiction. So let's do a few of these. If someone were to ever come up to you and say, there is no truth, You should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Yeah, you're going to turn the claim on itself and say, hey, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Can everyone see this is a self-defeating statement? Because they're claiming it's true, there's no truth. And what we're doing here is we're turning the claim on itself. And the real point I want to make here is, can everyone see that this statement shoots itself? That if somebody tries to say there's no truth, they're uttering a truth claim. So they're defeating themselves. How about this one? You hear this all the time. There's no such thing as absolute truth. If someone were to ever say this to you, what would you say to them? Yeah, is that absolute? If you want to have some fun, you can say, hey, are you absolutely sure? See, because that is actually an absolute truth claim. How about this one? You hear this a lot. This is my favorite one, by the way. It's true for you, but not for me. You know, Christianity's true for you, Buddhism's true for me. What do you say to that? By the way, we call this in the book the Roadrunner tactic. You can get the book to figure out why, but this is also self-defeating. It's just a little bit more subtle. How would you say, what would you say to somebody who says there is no truth? Or somebody who says it's true for you but not for me? What would you say? You would say, hey, is that true for everybody? Is true for you but not for me true for everybody? Because if true for you but not for me is true for everybody, then true for you but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because it's self-defeating. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Actually, there's a more fun way of dealing with this. If somebody says it's true for you but not for me, say, sure, go try that with your bank teller. Yeah, go down to the Bank of London here and say, look, I'd like 100,000 pounds out of my account. The bank teller looks at your account and says, I'm sorry, you only have 14 pounds in your account right now. It's very easy to get the money. You simply go, that's true for you but not for me. Give me the 100 grand. You going to get the money? No, if it's true there's only 14 pounds in your account, that's true for all people at all times in all places when referring to your account at that time. It's just true. Or let's suppose you're going a little fast down the highway. In fact, coming in here yesterday, Edson was driving us. You guys know Edson? Is he in here? Where's Edson? He was driving us. And we're driving along and suddenly, where are you, Edson? Oh, there you are in the back. We're driving along and suddenly we're driving down the highway and he slows up. He goes, he actually went this way. Did I ever tell you guys driving the wrong side of the street here? Anyway, he looked over and he goes, do you guys have these traffic cameras in America? Apparently not as many as you have, because about every 600 yards he went, right? Well, suppose you're out there and you're going, we're 60 miles an hour yesterday. Let's say you're going 90 in his 60. Cop sees you, pulls you over, walks up to your car, says you were going 90 in his 60-mile-an-hour zone. It's very easy to get out of a ticket. You simply look up at him and you go, ha, that's true for you, but not for me. And you speed away. He can't give you a ticket if it's not true for you, right? Now, by the way, I go to a lot of churches. I normally ask them, do you believe the Bible's true? And of course, most people will say yes, and then I'll ask them why. Do you know what answer I get more than any other, unfortunately? Because I have faith. Is that a good answer? Does your faith change whether or not the Bible's true? I mean, do you have to believe something to make it true? Do you have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground? Do people who don't believe in gravity float away? Hey, look, there's another one. Hey, if you believe, you'll come back. No, that's not the way it works. You say, why is the Bible always talking about faith then? Because there's two kinds of faith. There's belief that, and then there's belief in. Belief that is getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that the Bible is true. That's what we call apologetics. Again, it's getting evidence. But all the belief that in the world won't get your moral transgressions forgiven. Because you have to go from belief that to belief in. James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote a little document we have in the New Testament called James, said even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. Why? They know intellectually better than we do that God exists, but they don't trust in Him. There's a difference here. Belief that is intellectual. Belief in is intellectual and volitional. In other words, belief that is of the head. Belief in is not only of the head, it's of the heart. In fact, I was at a University of Michigan. Back a few years ago, I was debating an atheist by the name of Eddie Tabash, a brilliant attorney from Beverly Hills. And he asked me a question. We had the time to cross-examine one another, and his question to me was this. He said, Frank, my mother was a survivor of the Holocaust. She lived a life full of pain and suffering. Toward the end of her life, someone offered her the gospel, but she rejected it, and then she died. Is she in hell right now? I said, wow, that's a tough question to ask in front of a secular audience, thought to myself. But then I said, Eddie, I don't know where your mother is now. I don't know if she had a deathbed conversion or not. But if she didn't accept Christ before she died, then God is too loving to force her into heaven against her will. You see, because the assumption is everybody wants to go to heaven. That is not true. Who's in heaven? Jesus is in heaven. There have been people running from Jesus their entire lives. What's He going to do once everyone gets to the afterlife? All right, you're with me now. Get over here. You say, how would that be loving? Well, it wouldn't be. Well, what's all this business about hell then? I gave this illustration to the Michigan audience that night. In fact, I asked the ladies a question. Ladies, I'll ask you the same question. I'll just make believe you're the University of Michigan audience. Ladies, have you ever had a man pursue you whom you did not want to date? Some of you going, yeah, and he's sitting next to me right now. He will not leave me alone. In fact, whenever I ask that question, the ladies always giggle, and the men look at their shoes. They're going like, is she looking at me right now? Well, ladies, suppose this man pursues you. He pursues you. He continues to pursue you. He keeps asking you out. And you finally say to him, look, I like you, but only as a... Ladies, why don't you just stick the knife in and turn it? Every man has heard the dreaded friend rejection. Gentlemen, if you ever hear the dreaded friend rejection, move on. She's not interested. In fact, I have some shocking news for you. She doesn't even like you as a friend. Because if she did, she'd be interested, but she's not. Well, ladies, suppose this doesn't deter this guy. He continues to pursue, he continues to pursue, he continues to pursue. And he finally gets to the point where he says, look, I love you so much, I'm going to force you to love me. Run, screaming from the building. Ladies, can he do that?
Yes.
He can force you to love him? No. No, he can't force you to love him. Forced love is a contradiction. So if he ever says that, ladies, run away. Ladies, if he truly did love you, what would he do? He would leave you alone. That's exactly what God does for us. He sends us cards, letters, and flowers. He sends us creation. He sends us conscience. He sends us the Bible. He sends us Pastor Colin. He sends us Pastor Solomon. He sends us people who will speak into our lives the truth. He may even send you a dream or a vision. He may do a miracle of some kind. But if you keep saying, no, 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 I don't want you, then God will give you up to your own desires. He will leave you alone. Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 1. We suppress the truth to the point where God finally gives us up to our own desires. Now you might say, well, so God separates himself from us. What could be so bad about that? Well, imagine this. Every human being out there gets some of the common grace of God. His rain falls on the just and the unjust. Everybody experiences to a certain degree relationships, love, a hope for a future. We experience these things. In other words, everyone gets some of the common grace of God, whether they're a believer or not. But I want you to imagine a place where there is no love. There are no relationships. There is no hope for a future. There's just stone cold, narcissistic self-absorption. That is Washington. Oh, sorry. That is hell. You're cut off. You're cut off from the ultimate source of goodness. God is not going to force you into His presence. If you don't want Him, He will leave you alone. In fact, C.S. Lewis famously said, in the end, there's only two kinds of people. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, thy will be done. So the question is, which kind are you? Which kind are you? Again, either Jesus rose from the dead or He didn't. It's not just true for you if He rose from the dead. It's true for everybody. Now, you have to accept it. You have to appropriate it. If you don't want God, He won't force you into His presence. But you have to accept it. Of course, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, you can believe it all you want. Not going to make it true. So it's true or false, regardless of what you believe about it. How about this? You might hear this a lot when you go to university. There's no truth in anything but science. Sounds so persuasive, doesn't it? Can anyone see the problem with it? Apply the claim to itself. Turn the claim on itself. What's the problem with it? Can anyone see it? What would you ask somebody who said this? Yes, you'd say, hey, is that a scientific truth? Can you go in the laboratory and prove that? No, that's a philosophical claim. That's a philosophical claim. You can't prove that by science. In fact, you can't do science without philosophy. You can't read the Bible without philosophy. You can't even read the newspaper without philosophy. In fact, philosophy undergirds everything we do. And I think on Sunday night we're going to talk a little bit about this. In fact, there's a whole chapter in the book, Stealing from God, that deals with this issue. In fact, we'll see Sunday night when we get into this how important philosophy is to science and theology. But to say that all truth comes from science is self-defeating because that is not a scientific truth. It's a philosophical claim. Now, how many have heard of Immanuel Kant? Okay, you know what Immanuel Kant said? It's easy. Kant said, you can't know the real world. You got it? That's basically what Kant said. Why? Because there's a real world out there, but when the phenomena from the real world gets to your mind categorizes it in such a way that you can't know the real world, you can only know what your mind does to it. Leave it to a philosopher to come up with this, right? What's the problem with the claim? Can anyone see the problem? Apply the claim to itself. This is the interactive portion of the program. If Kant were here today and were to say, you can't know the real world, you would say, then how do you know that about the real world? Why can Kant know about the real world, but we can't? Do you see the problem? All modern philosophy goes through Kant. If you buy into Kant, you buy into modern philosophy, which means you buy into agnosticism, which means you can't really know anything. But it's self-defeating because he says he knows he can't know. See the problem? How about this one? You should doubt everything. What would you say to somebody who said that? Yeah, you got it. Should I doubt that? You see, why are skeptics skeptical of everything but skepticism? You ever notice that? Skeptics are not skeptical of skepticism. They think it's true. Now, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have ever doubted what you believe? Whether you're a Christian or an atheist, you go, man, I don't even know if this is true. Yeah, I do. I doubt sometimes. I wrote a book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And sometimes I wake up and I go, is this stuff really true? You ever do that? Now, when I start thinking about my doubts, however, I realize that most of my doubts are emotional. They're not intellectual. In other words, it's because I'm having a bad day, I'm doubting. It's not because I think the evidence for God isn't there or Jesus rose from the dead. In fact, the evidence is quite strong. What's changing is me. Sometimes I'm having a good day, everything looks fine. Next day, bad day, doesn't look good. Good day, everything's fine. Bad day, doesn't look good. What's changing, me or the evidence? I'm changing. Let me ask you another question about this. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Christianity is true. That's what we're doing here. We're going through arguments that it is. Let's just say it is. It really is. If you doubt it, does that change the fact that it's true? No. You ever hear people say, well, I lost my faith? Okay. Does that mean Christianity is no longer true because you lost your faith? No. If Christianity is true, you can lose your faith and it's still true. On the other hand, if it's not true, you can have all the faith you want. If it's not true, it's not true. So instead of concentrating on yourself, going up and down like this, you ought to concentrate on the evidence. Because your psychological state and my psychological state does not affect whether or not God exists or Jesus rose from the dead. It's the evidence that shows us whether or not he did. In fact, a friend of mine, Greg Koukl, I don't know if you ever heard of him, he's wrote a great book called Tactics. And he doubts sometimes. He says, in fact, before I have my first cup of coffee in the morning, I'm an atheist. After I have my first cup, I'm a Jehovah's Witness. And by the time I have my second cup, I'm back to being a Christian again. Right? What's changed? The evidence? No, he has changed. The evidence doesn't change. We go up and down. Now, by the way, doubts can be a good thing. Why? Why can they be a good thing? Because it forces you to get answers. It forces you to dive in and to learn, and that's a good thing. Now, you can go through all this. Oh, by the way, skeptics, for example, atheists, they'll say, well, to Christians, they'll say, you Christians, you have the burden of proof. If you're going to say God exists and Jesus rose from the dead, then you've got to give evidence. We do. But atheists act like they don't have any burden of evidence, or any burden of proof, I should say. They say they just lack a belief. That's not the definition of atheism. They just lack a belief. Because if that's the definition of atheism, then this remote is an atheist. Right? It lacks a belief in God, right? Maybe I should get it some evidence. This computer is an atheist by that definition. This floor, any inanimate object, is an atheist by that definition. No, an atheist is someone who thinks the evidence shows there is no God. And I've noticed that atheists don't just lack a belief in God. They come up with all sorts of explanations to explain why the universe is the way it is. They'll say it's quantum theory. They'll say it's evolution. They'll say there are multiple universes out there. They'll say that materialism's true. They don't lack a belief in any of those things. They have positive beliefs that those things are true. So if you're ever having a discussion with somebody on that, you ought to say, well, what evidence do you have that those things are true? Right? See, he who is a skeptic in one set of beliefs, Christianity, is a true believer in another set of beliefs, materialism. So don't let him off the hook by saying you have the burden of proof alone. No, they do as well. Now, here's the granddaddy self-defeating statement of them all that you're going to hear. You ought not judge. Right? You hear this all the time. Jesus said, don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrites? Now, before we get to Jesus, let me just ask you a question. What's the problem with the claim? Can anyone see it? Yes, if somebody says you ought not judge, you ought to say, isn't that a judgment? Or you might say, then why are you judging me for judging? See, this is a judgment. You ever notice that? Now, by the way, what did Jesus say about judging? Did he just say, judge not, and that was it? No, he said, judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you'll be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It is a command on how to judge. In other words, don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it first. In fact, you could say it this way. Jesus is basically saying, judge yourself first before you judge somebody else. Square your own life away first before you go after other people. That seems like pretty good advice, don't you? In fact, Jesus said in John 7:24, he said, stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. Do you notice that everybody has to make judgments? It's not just Christians who do. Muslims make judgments. Hindus make judgments. Agnostics make judgments. There's not enough evidence. That's a judgment. Atheists make judgments. If you're a Christian, they're judging you as being wrong. They think the Bible's not true. God doesn't exist. Those are judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? Now, I will say this. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? The Pharisees. And who were the Pharisees? What did they do? What was their job? The Pharisees were the religious and political leaders of Israel. They ran Israel, and Jesus went after them. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. Have you ever heard somebody say this? Oh, that guy is such a saint. He's never said a bad word about anyone. Well, if that's the definition of a saint, Jesus was no saint. You just need to read Matthew chapter 23. What does Jesus say in Matthew chapter 23 to these scribes and Pharisees? Woe! Woe! Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you brood of vipers! You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes. Jesus was not Barney, the purple dinosaur. Can't we all just get along, boys and girls? No! He was not Mr. Rogers. Can you say kindness, boys and girls? Well, he was kind most of the time, but he certainly didn't go around saying, this sermon brought to you by the letter E. Jesus was tough. And sometimes you got to be tough and tell people straight out they're wrong. Because if you don't, you're enabling them. See how direct Jesus was. Very frequently, he was very, very direct. Sometimes he was oblique, but sometimes he was very, very direct. By the way, I've noticed one other thing about judging. You ever notice that when you compliment somebody, which is a judgment, nobody gets upset? Like if I were to say to Pastor Colin, Pastor Colin, what a wonderful pastor you are. You're doing some great work here in London and all around the world. You're amazing. You think he's going to go, who do you think you are? Are you judging me? You think you're worse than me? No, he's never going to say that, right? Because I've noticed that people don't really have a problem with judging. They just have a problem with judgments they don't like. And if you say something that's true to somebody, and you say it in a nice way, and they're all upset, you just help convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. Jesus said we love darkness rather than light. If somebody tries to expose your evil deeds, you're going to resist that. For you military guys in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. If you start preaching truth and people are upset with you, you're over the target. Now, we could spend a lot more time on this, but we don't have time on these self-defeating statements. Let me just do one more, because you hear this all the time. Well, actually, two more. People will say, all truth depends on your perspective. What would you say if somebody said that? Apply the claim to itself. Come on, you guys are like Charlie Brown's teacher in here. Wah, 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 wah. Somebody make a call here, all right? If somebody says all truth depends on your perspective, you should say, does that truth depend on your perspective? Then they might say, oh, you're just playing word games with me. What would you say to that? Is that a word game? Why is it when I say it, it's a word game? When you say it, it's logic. Right? Now, this ability to turn the claim on itself is an easy way for you to be a lie detector. Because if you get good at applying the claim to itself, you can be a lie detector, which reminds me of Homer Simpson. Check this out.
Now we're going to run a few tests. This is a simple lie detector. I'll ask you a few yes or no questions, and you just answer truthfully. Do you understand?
Yes.
Can everyone see that's another example of a self-defeating statement? All right, very good. So, what is the truth about truth? Contrary beliefs are possible, but contrary truths are not possible. I mean, you can believe everything's true, but everything can't be true. You can believe the earth is flat if you want. That's not going to make it flat. And objective truths can't be denied without being affirmed. Suppose somebody says there are no objective truths. What should you say to them? Come on, you got to get used to this now, right? You should say, is that an objective truth? If they say yes, they've just defeated their own argument. If they say no, then you might say to them, well, why should I believe it then? If it's just your subjective opinion, it's not really true, it doesn't correspond to reality, why should I believe it? You see, you can't get away from objective truth. Actually, you can get away from it temporarily. How do you do that? You suppress it. You suppress the truth because you want to go your own way. Paul, again, talks about this in Romans 1, that we suppress the truth and unrighteousness to do our own thing. In fact, here's a question I ask atheists on college campuses. I do a lot of college campuses in America. Doing a presentation like this, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And during the Q&A, where we have microphones set up, if an atheist gets up to the microphone and expresses a little bit of hostility, I'll ask this question. And I think this is the one question you should ask somebody who's not a Christian. Here's the question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at the microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no! No? Wait, you claim to be an atheist, a beacon of reason. Never mind if atheism's true, reason doesn't exist, because if atheism's true and we're just molecular machines, like Francis Crick said, if we're just moist robots, we're not really reasoning anyway, we're just reacting. But let's leave that aside. I ask you, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not. The problem isn't here. The problem's here. They don't want it to be true. In fact, I ask this question of all audiences I speak to now. I'm going to ask you guys this question. For those of you who are Christians in here, let me ask you a question. I want you to think of somebody that you know who's not a Christian that you'd like to be a Christian. Everyone have somebody right now? Got somebody? Okay, here's the question. Is the person you're thinking of right now on a relentless pursuit of truth? Or are they apathetic or even hostile to the Christian faith? How many say the person I'm thinking of is on a relentless pursuit of truth? They want to know it. Nobody. How many people say, maybe one, how many people say the person I'm thinking of is apathetic or even hostile? Look at this. The problem for most people is not intellectual, it's volitional. They don't want it to be true because if it's true, that is terrifying. Why is it terrifying? Because that means they might have to change something they don't want to change. They might have to start doing something they don't want to start doing, or stop doing something they don't want to stop doing. In fact, I've asked some of the atheists I've debated, what's the real issue? And some of them have admitted the issue. In fact, the real issue is not evidence. The elephant in the room is not evidence. The elephant in the room is morality and accountability. People don't want it. In fact, you're a sophisticated audience in here. I know this is politically incorrect to say, but that's okay. I'm going back to America soon. The elephant in the room, if you want to drill down further, is sex. That's the elephant in the room. In America, the things we argue over culturally, all related to sex. Abortion, same-sex marriage, transgenderism, government pays for your contraception, government pays for your abortion. Now we're arguing over what bathrooms to use. You notice any common thread running through those things? All related to sex. That's the new religion in America. I don't know if it is here in the UK, but that's the new religion. It's an old religion resurrected. Look, if there is no God, some people say, what else is there? My identity comes from sex. And if the Christian worldview is true, God has narrowed sex for our own good to a man and a woman forever in matrimony. Not for his benefit. He doesn't get anything out of it. He's infinite. It's for our benefit. But people don't want that. So ask the question, if it were true, would you become a Christian? Now, atheists rightfully will turn that question back on you and say, well, if atheism were true, would you become an atheist? And my answer is yes, but there's no way to show it's true. In fact, we'll talk about that Sunday night. Atheism has made reason and science impossible. So just remember, the elephant in the room isn't always evidence. Now, for some people it is. I came to faith through evidence because I wanted to know. I wanted to know if it was true. So I read apologetic books. Evidence Demands a Verdict, More Than a Carpenter by Josh McDowell. That's how I got into this whole thing. I came to faith through apologetics. But for many people, they don't want the truth. They want to suppress the truth. But that's okay. If you ask that person you're thinking of that question and they say, no, I wouldn't become a Christian, or they hesitate, continue to love them. Then one day your phone is going to ring and that person's going to be on the other end. Because when something goes terribly wrong in their life, they're going to call you. They're not going to call their atheist pal. Because what the atheist pal going to do? Well, you know, that kind of stuff happens. There's no hope. They're going to call you because they know you're a person of spiritual depth. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And they're going to call you. So evidence is important, but remember, it's not always about the evidence. What evidence does is it clears away objections that allows you to see the cross. That's what we're really trying to do here. In fact, it was Pascal who said this: people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. In fact, Pastor Colin and I were talking before. A friend of his changed religions three times. And Pastor Colin's trying to say, well, is this about truth? No, it wasn't about truth for him at all. It was just about what he liked. Gee, I think I'll try Buddhism for a while. Now I'll try Islam for a while. That didn't work. Let me go back to secularism. Colin's hoping he may get to Christianity one of these days, right? It's all about what they like, what they find attractive. Now, we've got to ask ourselves, if we're Christians in here, we've got to ask ourselves, where did that slide go? No, we've got to ask ourselves, are we doing this? Are we just Christians because we find it attractive? We find it attractive. There's a God who looks over us, and when we die, we're going to be with him and our loved ones. Or is it really true? Now, thankfully, you can be right about something without knowing why, right? In fact, the witness of the Holy Spirit can tell you it's true. There's a difference between knowing Christianity is true and showing it's true. The witness of the Holy Spirit can help you know it's true, but it can't help you show it's true because the other person can't see the witness of the Holy Spirit. Only you can. So, point one is, does truth exist? If our reasoning has been good here, what does this mean? It means that relativism and postmodernism are false. Why? They say it's true, there's no truth. Or they say it's true, all truth is relative. So the Bible could be true, but so could atheism, right? Richard Dawkins might be right at this point. In order to figure out who's right, we got to move on to the next question. And that next question is, does God exist? But we can't move on to that until tomorrow.